everyone. Today I'm so excited to be talking to author Ted Wheeler. And Ted's newest book is called Kings of Broken Things. And he's got the copy. There it is. I love that cover. And thank you so much for talking to me today, Ted.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Wow, this book is a ride, okay? And I just left an Amazon review saying that, so you'll see it. And I'm
Cool.
trying to get better about Amazon reviews. I'm really bad about it, but I know that it's important, so I tried to. It's easy at the end of a Kindle. I read it on Kindle, so at the very end, it's like, leave a review. Yes, I can do it right then, you know? And then I don't have to worry about it.
I always forget that too, like even being an author and knowing how important it is, but I usually just do like a big batch every once in a while when I remember. But.
Exactly, and I don't really like it. I don't read Amazon reviews, so that's why it's also, because I like to experience books for myself. So, but whatever, I know that it helps everybody, so I'm trying to get better about it. But anyway, so this book, oh my God. First of all, I'm 52. In history class, it's like I don't think I ever learned about this stuff in history in high school. You know, it's like World War I, they kind of gloss over, and then World War II, you know, and then it just kind of trails off. So I was going to high school, late 70s, early 80s. But it's not like I didn't hear about this event. It's like, you know how you kind of just hear it, and I'm like, but now, not only did I read your book, but I looked up some YouTube on it, and, you know, I really was interested in knowing exactly what happened. Especially because I think it's really important what happened, especially in this day and age, what we're still learning about race and everything that we're going through. It turned out, you know, I think it's really timely. I think this book came out at the perfect time. So let's tell everybody, I'll let you give your pitch for everybody about the book.
All right, so Kings of Broken Things is set in Omaha, Nebraska during World War I mostly, and like the year after World War I. It follows a group of mostly German-American immigrants who were either displaced by the war or ended up in Omaha for various reasons. And the big historical overlay for this is around the Omaha race riot of 1919 and the lynching of Will Brown during that riot. So, like I said, you know, that's just kind of the structure for it, where all these kind of different issues are coming through. So it follows a lot of like organized crime in Omaha that were involved in the riot as well, and kind of these issues of the war, the home front during the war, and immigration, and race relations. So, yeah, there's a lot in there.
There's a lot, okay? You covered a lot of history, which was awesome, okay? Because I did not, like I said, if somebody has no background like me, they will learn so much about what was going on. And to me, the most interesting part about it is, like, this is happening in Nebraska. Okay. Now, I'm like I said, I'm in Pennsylvania. I look at Nebraska as this very nice, calm place to go to. Like, I think it's crazy that this was happening in Omaha, Nebraska in the early 1900s. You know, it's just nothing that anybody would, you know, you'd think Chicago, New York, you know, the big cities. Okay. But I love your characters. You are such a character driven. Like, your characters are so amazing. Okay,
oh,
I felt so connected to each one of them as if they were real people. Actually looked it up because I couldn't believe they weren't real people, you know?
Yeah, a couple of them are like Tom Dennison, who's a character in the book, kind of a more minor character, but he was real. And
right.
So there are a few like peppered through, but yeah, most of the main characters are all fictional.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the beginning setting of this, my dad worked for a union. So in the 70s, he worked for Mack Trucks, which was a big company back here, and he did a lot of strikes. So that was a very big part of the 70s for me. And when I read I actually went to Wikipedia to read up on some of this to find out exactly what was going on with the unions, and I had no idea. So they're like bringing in the black population of Omaha like doubled during the teens. Because they wanted strike breakers. So the big companies were trying to bring in workers to say, you know what, we don't need you guys. We got people, you know, that'll work for this wage and be happy about it.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, they would pay about a third for like a black worker than they would like the union guys. So more or less, you know, just advertising that or just saying that their jobs up here and that kind of, I don't know, not necessarily like a myth of the North, but just that it was friendlier than the South, which I think was true, even though, obviously there's racism everywhere in the country
Right.
and violence everywhere too. But yeah, just creating that strife. And I think, a lot of the ownership did that to just to create that strife between the races to further benefit them.
Cause, right.
So like bringing in like this whole new population over a couple of years. I mean, just a massive disruption to the workers that were here already. But
and to families, and at that time, especially in the early 1900s, I know what I went through in the 70s, but in the early 1900s, the workers were really trying to they didn't have basic, what we take for granted now, okay? There was no, it was like you could work, 20 hours a day if they wanted you to, or, there just wasn't any rules like we have now that we take so for granted. Now those workers were really trying to establish something for their families, and they could just get paid, peanuts compared to every other industry. And I guess this was the meat packing industry, correct?
A lot of this was meat packing. There's a lot of warehouses in Omaha at the time because the Missouri River comes through here, and river traffic was still bigger. And of course, the railroad is huge here too.
Right.
Where this was the eastern terminus of towards the Golden Spike in Utah.
So that's what I loved. You took these three characters. We got Jake. Okay, you made them from every different part of like what was going on. So you got to see the perspective of these three characters, which I loved. And Jake he somehow gets involved in the mob. In the what kind of mob was it really? I mean, just so I understand.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little different. I mean, this era is more of the era of machine politics. So, like, it was more based on getting people elected. And they were running gambling, they were running prostitution. And Nebraska actually went dry with Prohibition in 1917, so it was a few years than the rest of the country. But, like, that kind of running illegal booze wasn't as big a business at that point. So it's not exactly kind of like the Al Capone, like, Untouchables kind of, like, mafia, but... it was somewhat similar in its structure, but it was just more they owned certain policemen, they would own the mayor, and then in exchange for getting all these people power, they would get the spoils of it.
Which is
and it was more or less based around getting like the immigrant populations to vote for them too. So that was where like the boss came in because he controlled a lot of these immigrant neighborhoods and he could tell them how to vote, which he would kind of spread the spoils around to them to a certain degree as well. But it wasn't as like violent as it would become like in the late 20s and 30s.
Yeah, and that's another thing. It's like just to think about like that time and there is that kind of corruption going on in Omaha, Nebraska. Like that's just it was crazy to learn that, because like I said, especially me being here, I'm between Philly and New York, and that was common for that, our area, but I knew, that it was still going on, everywhere else in the country too at that time. And also like, okay, so we have World War I coming to an end, okay? And the guys are coming home. And, right, I mean, World War I ends in 17?
1918.
18, okay. So it ends in 18. So this is like goes into 18 and 19. So, they're just coming home. And is that where, so these large immigrants, is that why they had fled Europe and then they found a home in Omaha? Like, is that basically what happened during or was it even before that?
A lot of it was before it. Like, the bigger German waves started even as far back as, like, 1848 and 1849, where a lot of German immigrants came to the U.S. So a lot of people were already here, at least in that community. About half of Omaha had some German blood. Wow. So it was a very German town at that time. But, I mean, similar to Chicago, where the meatpacking plants were and the stockyards were so big that they needed a lot of cheap labor. So they were bringing in a ton of immigrants, Italians, Lithuanians, Polish, to have the manpower to make those things function. So there were a lot of different groups coming in, especially at that time. I think that was more when more Italian groups started coming in and more Central European because of the war or people being displaced.
Okay. Because I was trying to imagine, them finding a home in Nebraska. Like, it's like, how did they find Nebraska?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just like word of mouth in a way, or Actually went to and saw like the library had a Holocaust survivor speak last night about her experiences, but she ended up here just because she after World War II she ended up in New York, and then like her family found somebody for her to marry, and then her new husband had uncles in Omaha who owned a business, so they're like, you're getting started, like come open up a grocery store. So like it seems like very common like that. Like
Right.
I don't think people had heard of Omaha necessarily. It's just, there's opportunity here, and
there's opportunity, right?
Someone, so come on out.
So come on out. Not so crowded either. Not like New York, You're not like it's a little bit more space.
Especially, at that time, because the living conditions were just so bad on the East Coast, especially. I think a lot of people came west just to get air.
Right, just to get out of... yeah, exactly, just to get out. Okay, and then your next character, Eevee, okay? I loved her character. Loved it. You had made a reference that she was half and half, and I'm trying to think of what... Now it's... Okay, you just tell me. What was her nationality?
Well, she's American, but she's from Kansas. But her mom was black, and her dad was, he's also black, but he was mixed race, and he could pass. And so she was closer to her dad, where she could pass as white.
Okay. That's what I was trying to think of which way it was, whether it was her mom or her dad. So she could almost pass as a white person then.
And that's,
they knew.
Yeah, so she did. So that's why she came to Omaha and got out of like places where people knew her, so she could kind of start her life over again.
Start her life over, right. And then we have, and I hope I say this right, but is it Carl? Is it just...
Carl.
Okay, Carl.
Yep.
And he's a kid, and his family is German immigrants. And he's really good at baseball. And he finds his way into which they had like a baseball league. Was that part was true? The baseball
Yeah.
league? Okay.
That was going through the research, because it wasn't until like the later drafts of the book that I had worked all that in, where I kind of knew about it somewhat through research, but then about halfway through writing the book, like I was just frustrated and kind of at a rough spot in writing. So I just started writing about baseball quite a lot, just because it's what I enjoyed. So I don't know. I just needed more pleasure out of the process at that point, I guess. But it worked out really well because I also found a lot more research on these teams. So in 1919, the year the riot occurs, the riot was in September, but that July, there was a big melee. So they would have like a 4th of July baseball game between like a white team from the south side, which is where all the stockyards are, and then a team of black baseball players from the north side, which is the traditional African American community. But like at that game, there was a melee because there was one of the players was accused of tripping another player, and then they started going at it, and which is in the book. So that was like really handy because it was like a perfect kind of plot point and highlighted so many things. And just I guess I didn't have to imagine that or dream it up, like I just found it in the research.
Yeah, and his family structure is really interesting. The way that you did. He doesn't find out. I don't give spoilers, so I'm trying to go around everything, okay? Even though we do know how some of it ends, I don't want to give like spoilers for the characters because it's so amazing, the end of the book. But how he finds out about his family. He's got this tight-knit German family, but he's got a mom that he didn't really know or remember, and then he has a sister, Anna. And I was so curious, like, how did you come up with her character?
I think just writing a lot. I think with them it took a long time because, again, they were kind of a later addition to the book or a later draft. So it took a long time where they were always in the book, but they started off as really minor characters where it was more focused on Jake Strauss, and he was living in this boarding house, and they were just the family who happened to live there also.
Right.
But like the more I went over and rewrote things, they just had bigger and bigger roles. So I'm not really sure. Somewhat, I think, just with Anna trying to find more of a sympathetic character in a way, because a lot of the characters are kind of anti-heroes, or I just always try to have like that complexity where good people doing bad things, I guess, and sometimes bad people doing good things, but like, so having somewhat of a more foil to that. So as Carl goes through his troubles and through baseball ends up getting into trouble himself, like just having Anna there to kind of be the weight balance, like the counterweight to that.
It kind of
And
shows his character in a little different light when he goes home, and their relationship, their brother
mhm.
sister relationship, and what they go through. That's part I loved about him. But how are you loving baseball right now?
um, I'm a big Royals fan, so like it's an enjoyable season. But they won the World Series in 2015, 2 years ago, and we're in the World Series the year before that. So like we went to a few of those games, and so it's still, I don't know. I love October in baseball, but it's just a little bittersweet just after going at that apex of like all of the players I love and my team being at the top of it,
Yeah.
and now like they're not. So sometimes I don't really know what to do with myself, I guess.
Yeah,
I'll have to get
I have
over it.
two sons that are Red Sox fans, huge Red Sox fans. It was not a good day for them yesterday.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there's always tonight, I guess. And
There's always another game. At least with baseball, it kind of goes, you get the series, and it kind of, it's good.
yeah,
You know?
yeah, I remember. I'm like a Bears fan in the NFL too. So when they were in the Super Bowl against the Colts that one year, and like
Yes.
just not a good game, but that's all you get, huh? At least in baseball, you can turn it around the next day for
Right.
at least a week, I guess.
I'm a huge hockey fan, so, I watch them watch baseball, really. But I'm
Yeah.
a Penguins fan, and last night was not a good, we just didn't have a good sports night, any of us.
Yeah,
But anyway, I digress.
it happens.
Okay. That happens with sports, and it also happens in the book in sports too. So, okay, so all right, so their characters. I was like looking at my notes because I have huge notes, all these notes that I was taking down. So I love how their characters are in each other's lives, but not huge parts of each other's lives. They each have their own thing going, but it gives you such a different look at what was going on at that time. Because once 1919 hits, and then the rape and Will Brown, and the whole thing, to see it from all the different perspectives, I love that. Like, as I said, I didn't know that much, and I love reading books where I'm learning history at the same time, and that you took it from these different perspectives. I thought you did an amazing job with that. I really did. So,
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think a lot of it, like when I first started writing the books, I didn't have that many characters, and so the riot comes at the end of the book, and it's just so big. It's such a massive event where there were like 10 to 16,000 people in downtown Omaha. The courthouse was caught on fire. Like the mayor was hung, and like he wasn't killed, but he was nearly killed, and
right.
like in addition to like the lynching, which generally, I mean, there were thousands of them happening that summer and that year and in that era, of course, but it was just such a circus and a carnival and a grotesque scene. But to have one with that many people at it, it was really hard to write that and have it not just take over like the whole book and the story. Like,
right.
I always think of like the structure of like building a house, like a story's a house, and like it's important at the end of the story to like not blow the roof off the house, or don't knock out the walls by doing something that's too big. But
Right.
so I think having the other characters and bringing all these perspectives was the effort to try to let it be wild and crazy in this huge event that it was, but also be able to get around it and see it from different angles to contain it somewhat, I guess.
Yeah, and like I said, when I was watching the YouTube videos, I mean, I had already read your book, and then I got that, so I got a kind of perspective. But when I saw the pictures that were taken of actually what it looked like, how many people, I was like, wow, you hear the numbers or you read the numbers, but seeing the picture of what that courthouse looked like at that time, it was just, it was crazier than anybody I think can imagine, actually,
Yeah, it is. I work as a reporter. I report on the civil courts in Nebraska. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing the book, I'd spent every day at the courthouse for work. And so just walking around it and trying to get a sense of it. But yeah, it is really, it is like unimaginable, even, having written the book and spent so much time trying to imagine it. Right. I think some ways just like, I don't know, like the noise of it. I think they just couldn't imagine what it would be like to be around like that many people and people firing weapons and.
Well, right. And we just had the Las Vegas thing, and that was a lot of people in chaos.
Yeah.
And, you try to think of a mass thing. I don't even think it was that many people. Like that was for Omaha, Nebraska. Like it must have been every, how many people weren't there? That would have been more the question.
I think, Omaha was like a bigger city. I think it had a little more prominence at that time. Like besides like Denver and LA and San Francisco, it was like one of the bigger cities in the West at the time. But still, a lot of it, they had, it was their fall carnival was actually in town that week, where kind of everyone came in from the countryside to, see shows, and they'd have a coronation ball where they, this kind of fake thing where someone from society would be like crowned the new king and queen of Exarban, they called it.
Right.
But Nebraska backwards. But anyway, so there were just a lot of people in town in this festive mood. So again, like that grotesque like nature of it, where they had like the carnival going on, and then it just transferred to the lynching in, just very similar in how people celebrated, I guess.
Yeah, and one fun fact that I read about it, which I'm sure you know, but it was new for me, was that Henry Fonda was there.
Yeah. That was a big thing too. Like, so I read his autobiography, which has a couple pages on it. But he was like 10 or something like that. I don't remember.
He was like, but he saw it through a window. Like he was near but far, like from it.
Yeah, I think his family owned a printing shop across the street from the courthouse, and it was on like the second floor of the building.
Had, like, a view. He had a view of it.
Yeah, so it was like he went down there with his dad, and like, I don't know, because I guess, it's just like a big happenings going on, so everyone went to go see what was. But yeah, he did mention just how that was always a formative moment for him, and how he tried to have that kind of like social justice in a lot of his movies, because he just couldn't ever get over what he witnessed when he was a boy.
I mean, it kind of makes you understand him a little bit, like when I read that, I was like, oh, that kind of, something like that happening early in your life, that would kind of change the way that you look at life, But but I'm really happy that you wrote this. I really am. Like I said, there's so little that I knew about it, and I'm sure so many people. I don't think I'm the only one. Like it just wasn't. It just wasn't talked about, and to learn what was going on in that part of the country, and everybody can relate. It's all relatable to what was going on pretty much everywhere at that time after the war, and living there. I mean, I'm sure you had to grow up hearing stories about what happened.
Not a ton. I actually grew up in Lincoln, so there's a little of that like dynamic, like a rivalry.
What is the geography of that?
Lincoln is like an hour drive west of Omaha.
Okay.
But Lincoln, I guess how I think of it, like Lincoln's part of Nebraska, and Omaha is not so much part of Nebraska, like just culturally, where Lincoln is much more like growing up, we did a lot of pioneer history and stuff like that, which my wife is from Omaha, and just talking to people here, it didn't seem like they did that as much as like we did. Like, so it was never really taught in history class, at least. I know in fourth grade, like my homeroom teacher showed us, there's a famous photograph from the Omaha World Herald of Will Brown after he's been lynched, because they dragged his body around for a few hours and then burned his body in the street. So, but there was a picture of like people posing and like with big grins around his burnt corpse on the front page of the newspaper. And so in fourth grade, I saw that picture, which I mean, similar to like the Fonda thing, like I can imagine how much being there would stick with him just seeing that photograph and knowing that it was Nebraska, which, I mean, I think people here don't really talk about bad things a lot, and probably similar to everywhere, where you don't want to focus on the bad things. And they've been, and like I know the state motto for a long time was like the good life in Nebraska, and they're trying to sell Nebraska nice is their new one, like literally just saying we're nice people, which seems a little overbearing, but but I think that's why it's important too, because there is a lot of things, and there have been, even now Omaha has a lot of race problems. In the 60s there were big riots on 3 different occasions in North Omaha. I think we're still. They just, in the newspaper, they just did a thing, but for the last 3 years, Omaha was the most dangerous city to be black in by murder rate.
Crazy.
So, like, I mean, not that you expect anyone to put that on a billboard, but it's also, it's still happening in the state, and I don't think people like to talk about it, much less actually address those kinds of problems.
Yeah, it's almost like one of those, look how far we've come, and then not. Look how far, it's like, oh, look how far we come. Oh, yeah, but it's still not gone. Like we want it to be gone, and it's not. So it's kind of bittersweet reading it. It's like, oh, we don't do that anymore, so that's good, right? But then it's like, why is it still a thing? It shouldn't even be a thing. We shouldn't even have a thing,
I think, because I started writing this book in 2008, so with Barack Obama being president, but I think the first year or two, just people talked a lot about how we're post-racial and like what it meant having, and like obviously like. It wasn't true then, but just how much everything has come out. So I don't know if like having those conversations allowed like more of these discussions to happen, or if like Ferguson, where it was just more the technology had changed, where those stories can get out into the mainstream in ways that they never could before. Yeah. But it was interesting, like going from that. It took me 7 years to write the novel, so it was mostly those years and kind of having that feeling. I think of like. We can talk about this because we're moving on, or that we've moved on and we're beyond it, to where when I finished writing the book, like it was.
Like I said, it's so timely. It really is, because the country right now is in such disarray that and polarized and all that stuff. It's interesting. It's an interesting time. But okay, so you stuck all that time into this book. What are you writing next?
So I'm working on another novel, which I just finished a draft of this summer, which is set in 2008, mostly in Omaha and Chicago. Mm-hmm. And it's topical around, there was a safe haven adoption crisis, it was called at that time, in Nebraska. But we were the last state to have a law where new mothers could give custody of their infants over, their children over, just as we had like 3 where like babies were being put like in trash cans, or just people couldn't deal with it. Right. But we didn't have, at that time, if a mother tried to went to a hospital and said, I can't take care of my baby, she would be arrested or like charged. Wow. So they changed the law, which is good, but they didn't put an age limit on it, or it was 18. Mm-hmm. So, like, for a few months, like, people were, like, bringing their troubled teenagers, and you could go to the hospital and say you wanted to invoke the safe haven law, and then the custody of the child would be given over to the state. But I know that, like, somebody drove from Detroit, somebody drove from California and Atlanta just because they couldn't deal with their troubled teenagers anymore. But it was this big scandal. But
I'm really happy that you can find these things to talk about, because that's what makes people want to read the books. I mean, it's like bringing it to light, and it's like true story. You can't make up true story,
right? Yeah, it's a lot easier. I don't know. I don't have to be that inventive, and like I said, I'm a reporter, so I feel like I have skills that I can that help me out too, and just kind of remember those things. Because I think it's frustrating to be a journalist, too, where you put a lot of time into a story, and then people read it for, 20 minutes, and maybe people talk about it for a couple of days, but then something else happens, and, like, everything moves on, which is human nature and just how it goes. But, as the writer of these things, you get attached to stories, and as a novelist, you totally can revive these things and dwell on them and get people to spend more time with these issues than they would as opposed to an article in a newspaper.
Yeah, I never really thought about that with journalism, because especially like right now, okay, if you look at our summer, I was in Texas this summer when Harvey hit, okay? Mm-hmm. And it was like, as the things happen, I mean, it just seemed like it got worse and then worse and then worse. Like, you keep waiting for this other thing, and as a writer, like you said, people are reading it, and then something else happens, and then it's like people forget that Houston with Harvey, you kind of move on as the stories move,
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, that all that happened in such a short period of time, and in the meantime, you're like, Houston, I don't remember back that far, and it was like, that was just 2 months ago. That wasn't that far.
Yeah, but it seemed like it could have been, I mean, it kind of blends into the old ones, or just like last hurricane season or whatever. Like, it's hard to remember what makes it distinctive.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, when I found out, I read the book, and then I read that you were a journalist, and I was like, of course he was, because you had the details were so dead on, and I love reading books like that, and I can't wait to read your next book. And if you could just hold that up for everybody one more time, I will put all the links for Ted. I love the title. I think it's so perfect, and everybody has to find out how that works on their own. How that title fits on their own. But thank you so much, Ted. I will have all your links for everybody, and go get the book. You're getting great reviews on Amazon, so I'm really happy for you.
Yeah, it's been going pretty well. No, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, and we'll talk soon, okay?
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right.